All right, here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the premiere episode of Finding Fantasy. This is your host, David V. Mammina. I'm an author. I am also a card game creator, and I also teach social studies to some very talented kids. And today's first episode, I'm going to have a discussion with the architect, Mr. Andrew Kaplan, about what fantasy is to him, particularly since he is more of a fan of science fiction. Fantasy is in many different forms, and it means very different things to all of us, and it has influenced and inspired all of us, sometimes without us even knowing it. So please do like the video, and please do comment down below, because it might just be the two of us having a conversation in the video. I really do want to hear what you have to say. All right, so check it out, enjoy it, and I'll see you in the next slide. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our first premiere episode of Finding Fantasy, where we discuss all things fantasy. And hopefully, by the end of this episode, you'll know more about our star guest, Mr. Andrew Kaplan, the architect, and perhaps you'll also have a better appreciation of the fact that fantasy comes in all forms, more than you think. So, we've introduced this young man. Mr. Kaplan, how you doing today?
Not that young.
Not that young. That's a good answer. But I'm sorry that you have to say that. Because I'm a lot older than you. Anyway, so our viewers were able to get to know you a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You are something of a jack of all trades. So you're an architect.
Mm-hmm.
You are a writer.
Yes.
Science fiction. Primarily time travel, something that definitely threw me for a loop, and I really did enjoy reading it. And you are a woodworker and designer. And I think one of your greatest achievements is Star Trek Encyclopedia.
Yeah, that PhD level of Star Trek is a bit scary.
You should probably share with the audience your level of Star Trek. I mean, in conventions, you pretty much blow people away.
I was once told to dumb down my answers in a Family Feud game at a Star Trek convention.
I mean, what else do you want? So, there it is. So the reason we're starting with you, Andrew, you're a very good friend of mine, and you were able to help me create my card game, Redeem the Resistance.
Mm-hmm.
You essentially designed what it looked like. I remember we played once in your old apartment, and you said, this game is good, but it can be better. And you designed an incredible mechanic for everything. And I think ever since we sort of had that sit down, you made that card game what it is today. So I have to thank you for that.
No problem. But at the end of the day, it's having good information, good storytelling, and a good way of creating a language to really make the cards work. It was just finding the best way to describe stuff simply. That's all.
Well said, sir. Speaking of well said, I would love to pick your brain. That's, of course, why we're here. So I wanted to ask you, as you are an architect, among other things, how much imagination goes into what you do for a living?
A lot actually goes in. I dare I not say 24/7 of imagination, but it does get pretty close most of the time. At the end of the day, architecture essentially is just another form of art. May it be, a house, a skyscraper, a restaurant. There's things that every client wants. In my particular case, I design residential homes all over Long Island. Small houses, renovations, decks, sometimes even stuff like a 20,000 square foot mansion. Everyone kind of wants the same thing at the end of the day. Big open floor plans, nice kitchens, master suites, all those things. But everyone wants them differently. And between figuring out what the client wants and figuring out then how to make that work with zoning code and building code and how to get the permits approved, and even more so how to make it safe for both from a structural standpoint, fire safety, all those things. It's always a constant game of figuring out what's going on. And that kind of bleeds into other stuff too, because not just when it comes to architecture, designing wood art models, designing the card game. You got to really figure out how it all kind of comes together at the end of the day. And really, the only way to figure that out is by creating it in your head first, thinking about it, designing it, putting it on the paper, testing it, and if it all works, you've got a good product to start with at least. Does everyone like it? Well, that's a subjective thing. But at the end of the day, at least I'm always thinking it's always a process.
It's really amazing too because you have to um, assist in building on the imagination of someone else.
Correct.
I mean that's an incredible way of progressing day to day with your skills on how do I make this work, and yet it still has to be legal.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be sound.
Mm-hmm.
It can't fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of processes to that. So, all right. So this is a good question. I'm going to ask this to everyone I talk to. What is fantasy to you?
Well, it's a weird question at the end of the day. At least I think so.
Okay.
Fantasy, when you really drum it down, it's fiction. Now, when you think of that, fiction covers everything because fiction is science fiction, thriller, drama. It goes on and on. Fantasy, medieval, man, everything. Historical fiction, alternate histories, time travel. But when you say the word fantasy, I mean, at least I think of directly. I think knights in shining armor and magic and potions and Harry Potter and World of Warcraft and all those things. The fantastical, where science kind of gets put away for more the mystical stuff. But but if you're really going to expand what fantasy is, it's really everything, because essentially everything is of the imagination. In my case, you could say that fantasy is everything from Star Trek, Star Wars, Doctor Who, and again, all falls under science fiction. But then you start branching out to other things, such as like cop procedural dramas. You go into anime. You go into everything else. It's all dreamed up by somebody. It's a universe unto itself that isn't ours.
Well, I think to your point, um, I was going to ask you, you're a fan of sci-fi.
Yes.
You mentioned that, and you know so much about it. You've written it, you've watched it, you know so many different facets of it. So where does fantasy fit in sci-fi? Where do you draw the line?
There's two ways of looking at it. I think there's kind of just shoving it in where it works because the world building works. Like, you don't typically see a dragon on the Enterprise, but being that we're dealing with something in Star Wars like a galaxy of places, we see fantastical beasts where you go. Harry Potter is another example of mixing and matching kind of quasi reality of ours with other worlds. I think probably where the line gets drawn between science fiction and fantasy is where the logic of the world building can't explain what's going on fundamentally. There's because at the end of the day, you could argue that a scientist and a magician are the same things, or a wizard are the same things. They're both conjuring, they're both creating, they're both engineering things. But one could be explained by we go to A to B to C to D, and you get this. But with another, such as a wizard, he just casts a spell and boom, it works. But at the same time, inversely, from the traveler's perspective or the outside looking in perspective, science is a version of fantasy. You have things where technology to somebody can be magic because they don't understand how it works. Imagine an iPhone, a camera, anything electrical, for crying out loud, in the 1600s. It's just they would not know what it is. It would be something to them, dark magic. I would probably be a witch. But at the end of the day, to us, it's normal. And if we were looking at something that we can't understand, we might think it's magic.
Yeah, I think to that point too, from what you said, I have to agree because there's rules in fantasy too.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you think of magic, it just happens. But then in every fantasy, there's there's certain rules like, wait a minute, how does that magic work?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, that magic, like the magic in Tolkien's work, works different from magic in Dungeons and Dragons or in The Witcher.
Mm-hmm.
Magic is different. But even say like science fiction-y Star Wars, there's rules with the Force.
Mm-hmm.
Like who can summon lightning or who can do the Force choke? Can they all do it? Can they all summon lightning? So yeah, that's a good point too. That even though science fiction is very sciencey, very technical, magically, the rules are different, and it all depends on who writes them.
Yeah, and it's really funny. Just a particular tidbit of random knowledge. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is a big astrophysicist, science guy for all intensive purposes, he grew up watching Star Trek as a kid. And the story he always tells is that he believed everything in Star Trek could be possible. Transporters, warp drive, food synthesizers, aliens. All that was normal to him. What he never thought would believe, that he thought was complete fantasy, something ridiculous that never exists in the world, automatic opening doors. He never thought humanity would ever be lazy enough to have a door open for them. And what we have in every single store these days, opening doors.
Leave it to humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was laziness, but it was a piece of technology that seemed too out of reach for him. To him, that was fantasy.
Jeez. So the laziness was such a mother of invention, even a great physicist couldn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I should ask you, as an encyclopedia of Star Trek, how has the show influenced sci-fi fantasy, in your opinion?
That's probably a loaded question.
It's a big one. I'm sorry.
And I could go on for hours.
Okay.
But let's not.
Yes, please.
I mean, Star Trek is the granddaddy of so much pop culture today and other things that we take for granted. I mean, the communicator was the idea of a cell phone. Space travel was, we didn't even reach the moon yet when Star Trek first came out.
Wow. When was that? When did it first come out? I don't know.
1966.
1966. Wow. It's incredible.
And when it comes down to so many things with Star Trek, it's the originator of fan fiction. It's the originator of most the idea of modern day conventions like Comic-Con and stuff like that.
That's incredible.
Scientists, doctors, TV personalities, all were influenced by this show. It broke cultural barriers back then, which we take for granted today. As far as how it's influenced, let's say, fantasy, I mean, Star Wars technically was bred from Star Trek, not to piss anybody off.
No, it's a good point, though, sure. It was first.
And the idea of a mainstream science fiction show didn't really exist yet. I mean, we had Buck Rogers, a few other things, but they were very campy. Star Trek told allegories, told stories, was Shakespearean to some degree. It was more than just a fluffy show. And that's one of the main things why we have a legacy. There's a cat of Star Trek. And at the end of the day, it continues to be an influence 57 years later, simply because it's told the right stories, it's hit on the right cultural points all throughout its history, and it's relatable and it's hopeful.
I like that. I like that you say it's relatable and yet taking place in what they say is the last frontier. It's still very hopeful.
The final frontier.
Oh, the final. What did I say?
The last frontier.
Oh, that's Alaska's state motto. Social studies guy, Star Trek guy. Okay. All right. Let's get into some fun stuff.
Okay.
Not that we haven't been anything fun. I'm having a blast. I hope you guys are too. If you were in a fantasy book, game, or film, what would that be?
Well, we know the obvious answer, but we're not going to go there because that's too easy.
Too easy.
I would have way too much fun. I could tell you if I want to be an DeLorean because it would be a group of watchers from the alien species. I would be an admiral. I have my own fleet of ships, Prometheus class. Too much information, but we'll digress.
Okay.
Besides that, if we went strictly mainstream media, where everyone will really know what's going on, will I say? Probably Harry Potter might be a fun place to be because it's like that in between of fantasy and reality. Only in my case because I've never truly have been a follower of traditional like medieval fantasy Renaissance stuff. I like it, but it's not my go-to. So Harry Potter is kind of that middle ground. But if we're looking at something that really is true to my heart, in the idea of where I consider fantasy,
Hmm.
where you really expand into the realm of more all of fiction is a fantasy, the computer game series Myst to
Wow.
me is probably where I want to be the most.
It's a classic.
It is. There's two things that really speak to me in that series. One is the fact that it's a very world building lore essentially, where every single location is different. It's unique. It has its own properties, its own physics. There's a lot you get into with it, and as well the storytelling of the society of the Dunny, the people of the Mist universe that
Hmm.
once existed. It's rich. The idea of the art, which we both could enjoy, is written in such a way where they travel to other worlds, other realities, other possibilities through what they call the art, which is really them writing a book, and that book becomes a reality. And it really makes it the infinite universe of possibilities. And within that world, even my position as someone who's a builder, a designer, a thinker, a maker, really fits in well there. And it's just a really cool place to be. And then if you want to find something more interesting and more, maybe exotic, a trip to the Bioshock universe, may
Oh
it be
boy.
Rapture or Columbia, would be fun to visit. I don't want to live there
I
though,
wouldn't want to stay there very long.
but it's a cool
Hopefully
place to maybe
everything's
check
working
out.
out well.
Yeah,
I don't want anything going wrong.
just bring some extra ammo.
Yes, a lot of ammo. Well, since you said that, let's say you're in that world.
Hmm.
Pick one of the worlds. Would you be a warrior, archer, sorcerer? What else would you be? I mean, what would be your caste? What would be your archetype?
Hmm.
Your go-to?
See, I want to be the hero of the story, much like my
Of
books,
course.
but in reality, that's probably not me. I would probably be the guy behind the curtain, making stuff for everybody else, solving those problems, making sure that like, here, take your sword, go on your quest. And when the quest comes home, when there is a problem, I'm the first guy in line with all my tools, taking everyone else out.
You know why I love what you just said? Because you started off saying, in reality, this is what I would be in fantasy.
Hmm.
Because that's what it comes it down
Yeah.
to. There is realism in fantasy,
Hmm.
and that's when fantasy becomes relatable and fun.
Hmm.
When you can say, wow, this is really happening. This could really happen in this world. I can see myself in there.
Hmm.
So, Andrew, I have to ask you, because this has been such an awesome time. Before we sign off, do you have any questions for me?
I got one or two.
One or two? Let's do it.
All right. One, I think at the end of the day, one of my biggest curiosities is that I know over the last year you've actually been quite successful and very, I wish I had a better word than cool, to see you win a whole bunch of awards.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
One, what's that like, and what's the process like with that?
That's a great question. So I thought to myself, man, as an indie author, getting your work out there is very difficult. As if anyone is a writer, I'm with you on that. It's very difficult to get recognized. It's a very saturated market. So what you want to do is you want to look for places that give awards or will assess an up and coming author's work. Book Award Pro was my go-to because that website gives you access to all possible awards that might benefit you.
Hmm.
All right. because you got to think to yourself, there's a lot of generic websites, a lot of generic contests out there. You want to apply for a contest that is going to say, look, we have fantasy readers, we have sci-fi readers who are going to read your stuff. Um, and if your work is good, I mean, I have some errors in my books. I do. And the contest people even say that.
How dare you?
I know, right? I'm not perfect. But they even say it, but they say the story is great. You can feel the heart, the characters have depth. And that it does wonders for me to say, wow, what I did really matters.
Mm.
And I think that's what the first awards felt like that. The awards that come after just say, wow, okay, I'm so proud of this work that is out there in this world, that people are enjoying it, that it's getting recognition. It's funny, I almost feel like I don't get the awards at all. I feel like books get the awards. It's a weird thing. I think maybe some other authors, if you're listening, comment down below if you felt the same way, that your characters, your books almost have a life of their own.
I mean, I can relate to that too. When I get a project approved, or I have a permit approved, or I even see a final product of a house built where a client's now living in it. I mean, I know I did it all as far as designing it, making sure it was right. But when I look at the house, it's not mine. They won. They're the ones who have the house. I just got it to the finish line. I mean, I understand that logic. It's pretty, you know, it's relatable.
It's relatable.
It's relatable.
And that, I think, is the best type of fantasy, a fantasy you can relate to. Even if it gives you this great wonderment, you still need to relate in some way. It still has to draw you in. So, Andrew, I have to say this was such a great time. I had such a fun conversation with you today, and I hope our viewers felt the same way. All right, I'm going to leave some links to your products, your wood products. Do you want to actually show some before we sign off?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Oh, he's going to do it. He's going to break the mold. Some woodworking designs.
So, now, essentially, these guys here, there's like some of my Star Trek models. This is actually the USS Voyager, one of the larger models that I make. Usually they're about a quarter of this size, but easier for you guys to see. Essentially, I designed this similar to how I design houses. I draw it on the computer once I sketch it out. I laser cut it, assemble all the parts. It becomes this beautiful 3D object. And I know David has a couple of these models at home.
Oh, yeah.
In this case, his are more Mario-based, like a triglyph, different scenes from different games. This is Super Mario World 3, for example. Mario riding Yoshi over there. And if anyone is curious about that crazy science fiction time travel, this is actually my second book in the series, Casino's Paradox. It took 17 years to get together, but it works pretty well.
I'd say I read it.
He survived reading it. That says something.
I liked it. I had such a blast. Andrew, it's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
I can't wait for us to have more conversations when the camera's off, I guess.
Live long and prosper, folks.
Bye, everyone.